I never told my husband I owned the building outright. Not the first day we met, not the day he proposed, not even the morning we signed the marriage certificate at City Hall in Halifax. He knew I ran a business. He just didn't know how much of it was mine, free and clear, with no bank holding the other end of the rope. And when everything fell apart 18 months later, that silence was the only thing that saved me. My name is Margaret, and I am 63 years old. I have been called stubborn my entire life, first by my mother, then by my first husband Robert, then by my accountant, then by my own daughter. I have decided to take it as a compliment. Stubborn women keep what they build. I have seen enough of the other kind to know the difference. I was widowed at 54 when Robert died of a sudden cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in February. We had been married for 26 years. He was a good man, a quiet man, the kind who remembered to fill up your gas tank before a snowstorm without being asked. I did not know how to be alone. I had forgotten what my own preferences were, what I liked for breakfast when nobody else was eating, whether I preferred the radio or the silence. Those first 2 years I just moved through the house in Dartmouth like a ship that had lost its anchor and was drifting in circles, bumping into furniture we had picked out together, sleeping on my side of the bed out of habit, even though there was no reason anymore. My sister Patricia kept telling me to do something with my hands. She was right, as she usually is, even when I don't want to admit it. I had spent my whole career as an office administrator for a property management company in downtown Halifax. I was good at systems, at organizing, at keeping track of things that other people lost track of. I understood contracts and leases, and the quiet language of numbers on a spreadsheet. After Robert died, I took a ceramics class, which was a disaster, and a watercolor class, which was worse. Then I walked past an empty storefront on Quinpool Road in the spring of my 56th year, called the number on the sign out of pure impulse, and by September I had signed a lease for a small gift and home goods shop I called Harbor & Home. I had some savings, a modest life insurance payout, and a line of credit I was terrified to touch. I stocked the shelves myself. I drove to craft fairs in Cape Breton on weekends and bought directly from local artisans. I learned the cash register, the inventory system, the point-of-sale software, the GST, HST remittances, and the particular psychology of a customer who is browsing versus one who is actually going to buy. By the end of the second year, I was profitable. By the end of the third, I had paid off the line of credit entirely and was banking a consistent surplus every month. I was proud of that. I want to be clear about that because what comes later might make it seem like I should have been more suspicious from the beginning, like I was naive or careless. I was not naive. I was simply a woman who had built something real and was, for the first time in years, happy in a way that did not depend on anyone else. I hired a young woman named Sophie as my full-time manager. I brought on a part-time bookkeeper, a retired CPA named Gerald, who came in 2 mornings a week and kept my accounts in the kind of meticulous order that would have impressed the CRA auditors, had they ever come looking. I joined the local Business Improvement Association. I went to Chamber of Commerce luncheons and sat next to people who were doing the same kinds of things I was doing, building something small and durable, learning as they went. It was at one of those luncheons that I met Dennis. He was 61, recently retired from a long career in telecommunications sales. He was tall, well-dressed in the way that retired men sometimes are when they finally have time to think about it, with close-cut gray hair and an easy laugh. He sat down next to me because the chair was empty, and we ended up talking for 2 hours about nothing in particular, the waterfront redevelopment, the best place to get chowder in the city, whether the Scotiabank Centre would ever have decent acoustics. He asked for my card before he left, and I gave it to him, the Harbor & Home card with the little lighthouse logo that Patricia's daughter had designed for me. He emailed 2 days later. We had coffee, then dinner, then a walk along the seawall on a Saturday in October, when the leaves were down and the harbor was that particular shade of gray that I find beautiful in a way I could never explain to anyone who had not grown up here. I liked him. I want to say that clearly, too. I genuinely liked him. He was funny and warm, and he asked follow-up questions, which sounds like a small thing, but is actually not small at all. He remembered what you had told him the last time, and he asked about it. He remembered that my daughter lived in Vancouver and that I worried about the distance. He remembered that I had a bad knee from a fall on the ice 2 winters before, and he always offered his arm on slippery pavement without making a production of it. When he told me he had a daughter from his first marriage, a woman named Renata who was 34 and lived in Moncton, he described her as protective. He said it with a small smile, the way you talk about someone whose intensity you find both exhausting and endearing. I noted the word. I filed it away. I have always been a person who files things away. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. By that point I had told him I owned a business, a gift shop on Quinpool. I had told him it was going well. I had told him I had a good manager and a reliable bookkeeper and that I loved the work. What I had not told him was the full picture. I had not told him that the previous year I had quietly purchased the building the shop occupied, using a combination of retained earnings and a commercial mortgage that was already a third paid down. I had not told him about the investment account I maintained separately, the one I had been contributing to since the third year of the business, the one that was now substantial enough that my financial advisor, a woman named Colleen who worked out of an office on Spring Garden Road, had started talking to me about estate planning. I had not told him that Harbor and Home was not just a shop but a small, solid, growing enterprise that I thought of as my life's second act, built entirely from nothing, entirely on my own. I kept it vague, not dishonestly. I simply did not volunteer the full inventory. When he asked how business was, I said, good, steady. I'm lucky to have found something I love. When he mentioned in passing that he had a comfortable pension and some RRSPs from his working years, I said, that sounds like you planned well. We were both adults. Neither of us asked the other to produce a net worth statement over dinner. But I had thought about it. I want to be honest about this. I had sat with Colleen 2 months before Dennis proposed, and I had walked her through what I was thinking. I had told her I was considering remarrying, and she had looked at me with the particular expression of someone who is about to say something you may not want to hear, and she said, Margaret, you have spent 7 years building something that is entirely yours. Before you do anything, let's make sure it stays that way. I left her office with a referral to a family law lawyer named Andrew, who specialized in matrimonial property in Nova Scotia. I met with him once before the engagement, and once after. He was direct and practical and not at all sentimental about it. He explained the marriage contract, which is what Nova Scotia calls a prenuptial agreement, and he explained exactly what I needed to document and protect before any wedding date was set. He drew up a contract that was clear about what I had brought into the marriage, what would remain mine regardless of outcome, and what the terms were in the event of separation. Dennis agreed to sign it without much discussion. I was grateful for that. He said he understood that he was not marrying me for a gift shop, and he laughed when he said it in a way that seemed genuine. I signed too. Andrew kept the original. I kept a copy in a fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet and sent a scanned copy to Colleen and another to my personal email, which I accessed through a separate password that I had never shared with anyone. We were married in June, a small ceremony at a restaurant in the Hydrostone neighborhood with 31 guests. My daughter flew in from Vancouver. Patricia cried. It was a beautiful evening. The changes were gradual, and that is the thing I want people to understand. It was not sudden. If it had been sudden, I think I would have seen it more clearly. Instead, it came in increments, the way water works its way under a door in a flood. Not a rush, but a slow, quiet seeping that you don't notice until the floor is wet beneath your feet. It started with Renata. She came to visit 6 weeks after the wedding, driving up from Moncton in a silver SUV with Manitoba plates she had not yet switched over. She was a compact, sharply dressed woman with her father's coloring and a habit of looking around a room as if she was cataloging it. She was polite to me, thoroughly polite, the kind of politeness that has its armor on underneath. She hugged me, complimented the house, asked about the shop with what seemed like genuine interest, and then said, over dinner, that her father had mentioned I owned the building as well. She said it casually, the way you mentioned the weather. I said yes, I purchased it a few years ago. She said that must be quite an asset. I agreed that it was. Dennis changed the subject. I thought about that moment for several days afterward, the way she had phrased it, the way Dennis had looked down at his plate. 2 months later, Dennis began asking questions of his own. Not suspicious questions, nothing I could point to directly. He asked how the commercial mortgage worked, whether I had considered refinancing, whether I had a lawyer looking after the corporate structure of the business. When I said I had a lawyer and an accountant and a financial advisor and that everything was in good order, he nodded and said he just wanted to understand. that now we were married he felt some responsibility. I said I appreciated that and I steered the conversation elsewhere. But I called Colleen the next morning. And then I called Andrew. Andrew reminded me of exactly what the marriage contract covered and what it did not. He reminded me that in Nova Scotia, business assets acquired before marriage were generally protected as excluded property, but that any increase in value during the marriage could be subject to equalization claims depending on circumstances and how things were structured. He told me to make sure I was maintaining clean, clear documentation of the business's value at the date of marriage. He told me not to commingle personal marital funds with business accounts under any circumstances. He told me to keep detailed records. I thanked him and went home and did all of it. What I did not do was tell Dennis about that phone call. I had started to understand, in the quiet, practical way I understand most things, that the information I kept to myself was the information that was safe. By December, Renata was visiting more frequently. Every 5 or 6 weeks she would come up for a long weekend, ostensibly to spend time with her father, and she would always find a way to be near me when I was talking about the business. She asked me once whether I had considered taking on a business partner. She said it lightly, floated it like a small boat. I said no, I was happy with the current arrangement. She asked whether the building might be worth more if subdivided, and I said I hadn't thought about it, and I went to make tea. That night, I heard them talking in the kitchen after I had gone upstairs. I was not eavesdropping. I was standing in the hallway in my socks getting a glass of water, and their voices carried. I heard Renata say something about her father deserving to benefit from what was built, and I heard Dennis say something about needing to be careful, and I heard the word documents in a sentence I didn't fully catch. I stood very still in the dark hallway for a long moment. Then I went back to bed, lay in the dark, and made a list in my head of everything that was properly protected and everything that might not be, and I decided that first thing Monday morning I was going to call Andrew again. Andrew told me that short of a court order there was nothing anyone could take from me and that my marriage contract was solid, but he also told me to be cautious about anything in the home that could be used to reconstruct financial information. I had a filing cabinet in the home office I shared with Dennis. He could technically access anything in that room. Andrew advised me to move sensitive documents. I did. I moved them to Gerald's office, where they were filed under my business name in a locked cabinet that no one in my household had any reason to ever visit. In February, about 8 months after the wedding, I came home from a Saturday at the shop to find Renata sitting at the desk in the home office. She said she had been looking for a stamp. She said it so immediately and so smoothly that I understood she had prepared the sentence in advance. I said I kept stamps in the kitchen drawer and smiled at her and asked if she found what she needed. She said yes and got up and went downstairs. I went into the office and looked at the filing cabinet. The bottom drawer, which I kept locked, was still locked. The top 2 drawers, which held household records, were both slightly ajar in a way that suggested they had been opened and closed quickly. I stood there in my coat, keys still in my hand, and I thought, there it is. I did not confront her. I did not say anything to Dennis that evening. I went through dinner and a bottle of wine and a conversation about whether to get the front steps resurfaced before spring, and I was pleasant and present the entire time, and the next morning after Dennis went for his walk, I called Andrew from the bathroom with the fan on. Andrew said, "Margaret, I want you to know that even if she found something, there is nothing in those household files that changes your position. Your protected assets are documented, contracted, and held in a way that no one can quietly reroute. You have done everything correctly." That was the first time I had let myself feel properly frightened, and hearing him say that helped. I started paying closer attention. Dennis began mentioning, in passing, that Renata had looked into the property values of commercial buildings on Quinpool and that the market was interesting right now. He asked whether I had updated my will since the marriage. He asked it carefully, gently, and said it was something he had been thinking about for himself too, which was perhaps true. I said I had met with my lawyer recently and things were in order. He nodded. He seemed reassured. I was not sure by what. In March, Renata suggested at dinner that Dennis and I should consult a financial planner together. She used the word consolidation. She said something about how it was important for married couples to have a unified picture of their finances. I said that Dennis and I were both comfortable with our independent arrangements and that I had a financial advisor I had worked with for years and trusted completely. She looked at her father. He looked at his wine glass. I went upstairs early that night with a headache that was real. What I did not do was panic, because I had Colleen and Andrew and Gerald, and I had a marriage contract that said in plain English what was mine, and I had years of clean documentation that established what the business was worth the day I walked into City Hall in June, and none of that was going to change, regardless of what conversations happened over dinner. I had built the walls a long time before anyone tried the door. By April, I had begun to understand that the marriage was over, not because of one dramatic event, because I had been watching a pattern for months, and I knew what patterns meant. I had spent years running a business, and running a business teaches you to read what is actually happening rather than what you hoped was happening. What was actually happening was that my husband had allowed his daughter to treat my home like a site of investigation, had asked questions about my finances with increasing frequency, had not pushed back once on any of it, and had looked at his wine glass at the moment when a different man would have looked at me. I called Patricia on a Sunday afternoon and talked for 2 hours. She cried again, but differently this time. She asked me what I needed. I said I needed her to not say I told you so, even though I understood she would be within her rights. She said, "Maggie, I would never. She is the best of us, my sister." I made an appointment with Andrew for the following week. I told Dennis the week after that I thought we should separate. I said it quietly, at the kitchen table, on a Wednesday evening in late April, with the light coming in low and gold through the back window. I said I did not think we wanted the same things and that I thought it was better to acknowledge that before things went further. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he thought so too. He said it with a sadness that I believed was genuine, and I was sad too, a different sadness than the one I felt when Robert died, smaller and sharper and tinged with something like anger at the waste of it. Renata called me 4 days later. She was professionally warm and said she hoped we could navigate everything cooperatively and that her father's primary concern was fairness. I said mine was too, and I said I had a lawyer I was working with and that everything would be handled through the proper process. She paused, and in that pause I could hear the moment she understood that the door she had been trying was locked and had been locked from the beginning. The separation proceeded through Andrew's office and Dennis's lawyer's office with considerably less drama than Renata had likely anticipated. The marriage contract was clear. My business assets and the building were excluded property. The family home, which we had both contributed to during the marriage, was divided according to the formula in the contract. Dennis kept his pension and his RRSPs. I kept harbor and home. I kept the building. I kept the investment account. I kept my name on the door. 6 months later, I was standing in the shop on a Thursday afternoon in November, doing inventory with Sophie, and Colleen came in to drop off some papers and said I looked well. I said I was. She bought a set of locally made beeswax candles and a ceramic mug with a blue glaze that she said reminded her of the ocean. I wrapped them in tissue paper myself and put them in a bag with the lighthouse logo and walked her out to the sidewalk. And the air was cold and clean, the way Halifax air gets in November when the wind comes in off the water, and I stood there for a minute after she left and breathed it in. I still have my shop, I still have my building, I have coffee with Patricia every Saturday, and I am learning, slowly, to be alone again in the way that is a choice rather than a loss. My daughter is coming home for Christmas, and she is bringing her partner, and I have already started thinking about what I want to cook. I did not lie to my husband. I want to be clear about that, because I know some people will think what I did was deceptive. I simply kept what was mine in the places where it was safe, long before anyone gave me reason to be careful. I had built something over 7 years from nothing but my own savings and my own stubbornness and my own willingness to learn what I did not know. I had earned the right to protect it. A woman my sister knows got remarried at 60 and did not get independent legal advice and did not protect her assets before the wedding and lost a significant portion of what she had saved to a separation 2 years later. I am not telling that story to frighten anyone. I am telling it because it does not have to be how it goes. My name is Margaret, and I am 63 years old, and I still have everything I built.